The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Seoul glittered like a jewelry box designed by someone with too much money and too little restraint. Serena Vaughn stood near the entrance, champagne flute in hand, cataloging exits the way her father had taught her to catalog risk, automatically, constantly, without conscious thought. She'd been in Seoul for 3 months, consulting for a multinational firm that paid her extraordinarily well to identify financial inefficiencies in their Asian operations. Numbers made sense to her in ways people rarely did. Clean, predictable, honest in their own mathematical way. The guest list tonight was anything but honest. She'd come as a courtesy to her firm's senior partner, who'd secured the invitation through connections Serena suspected she didn't want to examine too closely. Networking opportunity, he'd called it, which was corporate speak for be seen in the right places with the right people. The room was filled with Seoul's elite, entertainment moguls, tech industry titans, politicians whose smiles were as polished as their designer watches. But beneath the champagne-soaked glamour, Serena sensed something else. The security was too tight, too alert. The conversations too guarded. These weren't just wealthy people protecting their status. These were people protecting secrets. She was considering her exit strategy when the woman appeared at her elbow. Mrs. Han Young-ok materialized like smoke, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her navy lace gown whispering against the marble floor. She was perhaps 60, with the kind of bone structure that transcended age and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. But her eyes, dark, intelligent, desperately afraid, betrayed the composure of her posture. "Forgive me," she said in flawless English, her accent carrying the slight British inflection of someone educated abroad. "You don't know me, but I know who you are. Serena Vaughn, graduated top of your class from Wharton, youngest senior consultant at Morrison & Wright, daughter of a decorated Marine colonel." She paused, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched Serena's arm. "I need your help with something that will sound absolutely insane." Serena's instinct was to step back, to politely extract herself from whatever complicated situation this elegant stranger was about to present. But something in the woman's desperation rooted her in place. She'd seen fear before, real fear, the kind that stripped away pretense and left only raw human need. "I'm listening," Serena heard herself say. Mrs. Han glanced around the ballroom with the practiced casualness of someone who'd spent a lifetime being watched. "See that man by the ice sculpture? The one in the gray suit with his back to us." Serena followed her gaze. The man was tall, powerfully built, with the kind of controlled stillness that suggested violence held in check. Even from behind, she could read the deference others showed him. The subtle way people adjusted their paths to avoid him, the respectful nods from passing waiters who somehow knew not to interrupt. "That's my son, Tae-min. In approximately 12 minutes, he's going to be introduced to Kong Mi-sun, the daughter of the Cheongsu organization's chairman. Her father wants to merge our families through marriage. If that happens, my son becomes a puppet, our organization becomes absorbed, and everyone I love disappears into a power structure that will swallow them whole." Her grip on Serena's arm tightened. "I need you to pretend to be his fiancée. Just for tonight. Just long enough to make the introduction impossible." The request landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications Serena couldn't fully process. "You want me to lie to a room full of criminals about being engaged to a man I've never met?" "I want you to save his life," Mrs. Han corrected softly. "And possibly your own. Because the moment Kong Chairman sees you at my son's side, he'll believe you're already part of this world. And walking away from this world isn't an option anyone extends to outsiders who know too much." Serena's father had always said that life-changing moments rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They crept up disguised as small decisions, insignificant choices that only revealed their magnitude in hindsight. As she stood in that ballroom, with the countdown to midnight ticking away and a desperate mother's hope burning in the air between them, Serena Vaughn made a choice that would reshape everything she thought she knew about loyalty, love, and the possibility of redemption in a world built on broken rules. 12 minutes, she said quietly. "Tell me everything I need to know. If you value the hard work behind these stories, hitting that subscribe button would mean so much to me. Also, before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from." Now let's continue. Mrs. Han's crash course in deception lasted exactly 11 minutes. They stood in an alcove partially concealed by an arrangement of white orchids that probably cost more than Serena's monthly rent, and the older woman spoke with the clinical precision of someone briefing a soldier before battle. My son is 32. He's been running our family's operations since his father's death 4 years ago. He studied economics at Seoul National University, spent 2 years at Columbia for his MBA, speaks 4 languages, and has never brought a woman to a family event because he doesn't trust anyone enough to expose them to this life. Mrs. Han's hands twisted together, the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. You'll need to be someone he would trust. Someone whose presence makes sense. And what makes sense? Serena asked, her mind already working through the logic puzzle, treating it like any other risk assessment. Intelligence. Independence. Someone who isn't intimidated by his world, but isn't part of it either. Someone who sees him as a man rather than a title. Mrs. Han studied her with an intensity that felt like being x-rayed. You're perfect because you're honest. Your discomfort will read as authenticity. Your questions will seem like a girlfriend learning about her fiancé's complicated family business. The term family business was doing heavy lifting there, but Serena let it pass. What about the fact that I'm Black American and clearly not from his world? Serena kept her voice level, but the question was pointed. She'd spent enough time in corporate Korea to understand how visible difference could become weaponized. Mrs. Han's smile was sad and knowing. That's exactly why this might work. Tae-min has always resisted the traditional expectations placed on him. Choosing someone like you would be seen as a rebellion, yes, but also as a declaration of independence that even Chairman Kong would hesitate to challenge directly. In our world, appearances matter. If Tae-min appears to have already chosen, the forced alliance becomes politically complicated rather than simply strategic. And when he realizes what you've done, that you've volunteered a complete stranger to lie on his behalf, then I'll have bought him time to find a real solution. Mrs. Han's voice carried the weight of maternal determination, the kind that would burn bridges and damn consequences if it meant protecting her child. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is space to breathe, even if that space is built on deception. The philosophy troubled Serena in ways she couldn't fully articulate. But before she could voice her objections, Mrs. Han was leading her across the ballroom, her hand a gentle but inexorable force at Serena's elbow. Han Tae-min turned as they approached, and Serena's first coherent thought was that photographs didn't prepare you for presence. He was handsome in the way that classical sculpture is handsome, all clean lines and perfect proportions that somehow failed to capture the essential aliveness of the person. His tuxedo fit like it had been grown rather than tailored, and his eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently narrowed in confusion at his mother's approach with an unknown woman. Tae-min, Mrs. Han said warmly, her entire demeanor shifting into something lighter, almost playful. I've been looking for you. I wanted to introduce you to someone before the midnight toast. He glanced between them, his expression carefully neutral. Mother. The single word carried layers of meaning, affection, wariness, and a trace of weariness that suggested this wasn't the first time his mother had sprung surprises on him. This is Serena Vaughn, Mrs. Han continued, her smile bright and utterly convincing. I've heard so much about her, and I finally convinced her to attend tonight. Darling, this is my son. The word darling landed like a grenade. Serena watched Tae-min's face cycle through confusion, shock, and then something more calculating as his gaze shifted to his mother's expression. He was reading the situation at speed, processing variables she could only guess at. Then his attention locked onto Serena, and she had the distinct sensation of being assessed by someone who'd spent years learning to identify threats and opportunities in equal measure. Ms. Vaughn, he said carefully, his English carrying a slight American accent that suggested those Columbia years had left their mark. This is unexpected. For both of us, Serena replied, deciding that honesty was the only weapon she had. Your mother can be very persuasive. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe, or recognition of a fellow captive in his mother's schemes. Before he could respond, a commotion near the ballroom's entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of men entered with the kind of coordinated movement that announced security detail, and at their center walked a man in his 60s wearing a traditional hanbok that somehow made everyone else's designer formal wear look frivolous. Chairman Kong, Mrs. Han murmured, her voice tight. He's early. Beside him walked a young woman in a red cheapao, beautiful in the way that seemed engineered rather than natural, her expression serene and utterly empty of genuine emotion. This, then, was Kong Mi-sun, the bride being offered like a chess piece in a game where human beings were reduced to strategic assets. We're out of time, Tae-min said quietly, his eyes still on the approaching group. Then he did something that surprised her. He smiled, genuine warmth flooding his features, and took her hand. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, and his grip was firm but careful. "Ms. Vaughn, Serena, I apologize for my mother's machinations, but I suspect we're both about to be swept up in something larger than either of us anticipated. May I ask you to trust me for the next few minutes?" There was something in his voice, a quality of steadiness beneath the danger, that reminded her of her father. That same sense of someone who'd learned to carry weight without complaining, who'd accepted responsibility without martyring themselves to it. It was the voice of someone who understood that leadership meant making impossible choices and living with the consequences. "Yes," she said simply, because really, what other answer was there? His smile shifted into something more complex, gratitude mixed with resignation. "Then please, for the next few minutes, look at me like you know my secrets and you've decided to keep them anyway." It should have been an impossible request. But as she held his gaze, Serena found that the expression came naturally. Because wasn't that exactly what she was doing? Choosing, with inadequate information and insufficient time, to stand beside someone whose world she didn't understand, simply because the alternative felt like cowardice. Chairman Kong reached them with the inevitability of a glacier. He was shorter than she'd expected, but his presence filled the space around him like negative pressure. His eyes swept over their joined hands, over Serena's face, and she felt the assessment like a physical touch, calculating, cold, measuring her value in contexts she didn't want to imagine. Tae-min, Kong said in Korean, his tone cordial but edged with steel. "I'd heard rumors you'd been spending time abroad. I brought my daughter to meet you, as we discussed." Tae-min's response was smooth, his body language subtly protective as he angled himself slightly between Serena and the older man. "Chairman Kong, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. May I introduce Serena Vaughn? My fiancée." The word detonated in the space between them. Kang's expression didn't change, but Serena felt the temperature drop by several degrees. Kong Mi-sun's placid mask developed a hairline crack, something almost like relief flickering across her features before being ruthlessly suppressed. "Your fiancé," Kong repeated, his voice flat. "This is the first I'm hearing of any engagement. We've been keeping it private," Mrs. Han interjected smoothly, moving to Serena's other side in a subtle flanking maneuver. "Given the nature of our business interests, discretion seemed prudent. But Serena has been patient enough with our caution. It seemed appropriate to acknowledge the relationship publicly tonight." Kang's smile was the kind that preceded violence. "How remarkably convenient. And tell me, Ms. Vaughn, what does your family do?" The question was a trap, and Serena recognized it instantly. Too prestigious, and she'd seem like a liability. Too common, and she'd seem beneath their world. She met his gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of professional confidence she'd cultivated in boardrooms full of men who'd underestimated her. "My father is a retired Marine colonel," she said clearly. "My mother is a federal prosecutor. I work in international finance consulting. We're not rich, Chairman Kong, but we understand duty, honor, and protecting what matters." She paused deliberately. Some things transcend business arrangements. It was the right answer. She saw it in the minute softening of Tae-min's grip on her hand, in Mrs. Han's barely perceptible exhale. She'd positioned herself as neither threat nor asset, but as someone operating by different rules entirely. Rules that implied this engagement was based on affection rather than strategy, on personal choice rather than familial negotiation. Kong studied her for a long moment, and Serena had the uncomfortable sense that he was cataloging her features, her bearing, her responses, storing them away for future use. Then he turned back to Tae-min with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations," he said. "I hope you've chosen wisely. The right partner can elevate an organization. The wrong one can destroy it from within." The threat wasn't even subtle. As Kong moved away, his daughter following like a shadow, Mrs. Han let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Well," she said quietly, "that bought us some time. The question is what we do with it." Tae-min was still looking at Serena, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately. Now." He led her through the ballroom with the kind of purposeful movement that made people unconsciously step aside. They ended up in a private salon off the main hall, decorated in serene neutrals that did nothing to calm the tension crackling between them. The moment the door closed, Tae-min released her hand and stepped back, creating careful distance. "I'm going to assume my mother gave you some version of events that made this seem like a temporary favor," he said, his voice level but strained. Let me give you the version she probably left out. Chairman Kong doesn't make social calls. He makes power plays. By positioning you as my fiancée, my mother has just put a target on your back that won't disappear when this party ends. Serena had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still sent ice through her veins. So what are my options? Practically speaking, none that are good. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its careful styling, and for a moment he looked younger, more vulnerable. Kong will investigate you. He'll look for leverage, for weakness, for any angle he can use to either force you out or control you. If he believes this engagement is real, he'll see you as a threat to his plans. If he suspects it's fake, he'll see you as proof that we're vulnerable to manipulation. And if I just leave, get on a plane tomorrow and go back to my life. His smile was bitter. Then he'll know we lied, and my mother's gambit will have failed. Kong will push the marriage alliance harder, and he'll make sure everyone knows the Han family can be backed into corners. Weakness is blood in the water in our world. He met her eyes directly. I won't force you to stay. That would make me no better than what my mother is trying to protect me from. But I need you to understand what leaving means. Not just for me, but for the hundreds of people whose safety depends on our organization maintaining the appearance of strength. It was a hell of a thing, Serena thought, to have your choices stripped away not through force, but through the sheer weight of consequences. She'd come to this gala as an observer, a tourist in other people's complicated lives. Now she stood at a crossroads where every direction led somewhere she'd never planned to go. Perhaps that was the first real lesson life was teaching her tonight. That sometimes the most important decisions aren't made in boardrooms or through careful analysis. Sometimes they're made in private salons at midnight, with incomplete information and only instinct to guide you. And sometimes the courageous choice isn't the smart one. It's simply the one that allows you to look at yourself in the mirror afterward. Tell me something, she said quietly. If your mother hadn't forced this situation, if you'd met me some other way, would you have wanted to know me? The question seemed to surprise him. He studied her for a long moment, and she could almost see him setting aside the tactical considerations, the strategic calculations, and accessing something more fundamental. Yes, he said finally. Yes, I think I would have. You're unexpected. In a world where everything is calculated, where every relationship is transactional, you're someone who speaks plainly and meets eyes directly. That's rare. Valuable. He paused. Also dangerous, in its own way. Honesty isn't always rewarded in my world. Then maybe, Serena said slowly, the words forming even as the decision crystallized, your world needs more honesty, or at least one person willing to provide it. She took a breath. I'll stay. Not because I'm trapped or because I don't have a choice, but because I'm making one. I'll be your fiancé, at least long enough for you to find a real solution to this situation. But I have conditions. Name them. First, no lies between us. I don't care what we have to tell everyone else, but when it's just us, I want the truth. Second, you protect your people. I don't know much about your organization, but if I'm going to be part of this, even temporarily, I want to know that we're not just trading one set of victims for another. And third, she hesitated, then pushed forward. Third, you let me help. I'm good at analyzing systems, finding inefficiencies, identifying problems before they become crises. If we're doing this, let me be useful. Let me be more than just window dressing. Tae-min's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost like hope. Those are reasonable conditions. More than reasonable. He extended his hand, formal, creating a new agreement on top of the fiction they were selling. Then we have a deal, Ms. Vaughn. Welcome to the Han family. I promise you'll regret this decision at least a dozen times before it's over. His honesty made her laugh, breaking the tension. Only a dozen? You're an optimist. No, he said quietly, his smile fading into something more serious. I'm a realist who's just been given an unexpected gift. I don't intend to waste it. Outside, the countdown to midnight began. Through the salon's windows, Serena could see fireworks beginning to paint the Seoul skyline, each burst of light a small, temporary defiance against the darkness. It seemed fitting somehow. This moment, this choice, this strange connection forming between two people who had no business being in each other's lives. All of it was temporary, fragile, likely to end badly. But it was real. And in a world built on deceptions, that had to count for something. The next 72 hours taught Serena more about cognitive dissonance than her entire graduate education. By day, she maintained her normal routine. Conference calls with Morrison and Wright, analyzing spreadsheets, providing recommendations on supply chain optimization that suddenly felt absurdly mundane given her evening activities. By night, she was initiated into the strange rituals of the Han family's world. Mrs. Han proved to be a meticulous instructor. They met each afternoon in the tea room of a traditional Hanok house in Buckshin that served as the family's private residence, and the older woman walked Serena through the unspoken hierarchies, the significant gestures, the careful language that governed interactions in their world. Power here isn't just about violence, Mrs. Han explained over cups of fragrant oolong. It's about respect, about maintaining face, about understanding that every interaction is a negotiation of status. When you meet someone from another organization, the depth of your bow conveys your assessment of your relative positions. Too shallow, and you insult them. Too deep, and you reveal weakness. It's like a constant chess game, Serena observed, where the board is invisible and everyone's making up rules as they go. Mrs. Han's smile was approving. Exactly. Which means the key to survival isn't knowing all the rules. It's being adaptable enough to learn them quickly and confident enough that people believe you belong. The learning extended beyond etiquette. Serena met Tae-min's inner circle. Park Ji-hun, his second-in-command, a man in his 40s whose scarred hands and careful speech suggested a violent past transformed into strategic thinking. Lee Min-ji, his intelligence analyst, a woman who'd earned her position through a photographic memory and an ability to see patterns in seemingly random data. And Choi Young-soo, head of security, whose initial skepticism of Serena softened into grudging respect when she correctly identified 3 potential surveillance vulnerabilities in their meeting location within 10 minutes of arrival. Your fiancé has expensive taste in security concerns, Choi observed to Tae-min, his tone dry. Most civilians don't notice camera blind spots or evaluate exit routes automatically. Most civilians weren't raised by a Marine colonel who believed in preparedness, Serena replied. My bedtime stories growing up involved tactical advantages and defensive positioning. I thought it was normal until I went to college. The comment earned actual laughter from the group, and Serena felt something shift, the tentative acceptance of someone who might belong in their world after all, even if she'd arrived by an unconventional route. But acceptance wasn't the same as trust, and Serena knew the real test would come when Chairman Kong made his next move. It came on the 4th night, at a restaurant in Gangnam that probably didn't have a menu because if you needed to ask about prices, you couldn't afford to eat there. Tae-min had framed it as a formal introduction to key business associates, which Serena had learned to decode as people whose goodwill keeps you alive. The dinner party consisted of representatives from 3 other major organizations, each bringing their own security, their own agendas, their own careful assessments of whether the Han family's unexpected engagement represented opportunity or threat. Serena wore a midnight blue dress that Mrs. Han had selected, elegant without being ostentatious, and she focused on the role she'd been given. The intelligent partner, supportive but not subservient, present but not domineering. She was succeeding until the dessert course, when one of the guests, a man named Hwang who ran gambling operations in Itaewon, made a comment in Korean that she wasn't supposed to understand. His tone was jovial, but his words were cutting. Han Nim is following his father's pattern, taking exotic pets instead of securing proper alliances. Serena's Korean was functional at best, but Mrs. Han's intensive coaching had covered the vocabulary she'd need to navigate these situations. She understood exotic pets perfectly well. She felt Tae-min stiffen beside her, saw Park Ji-hun's hand move fractionally toward his jacket, and understood that how she responded in this moment would define how she was seen by everyone at this table. She could ignore it, pretend she hadn't understood. That was the safe play, the one that avoided confrontation. Or she could do what her mother had always taught her. Never let disrespect go unchallenged, because what you permit, you promote. Serena set down her fork with careful precision and turned to Hwang with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Hwang, she said in English, knowing Tae-min would translate if needed. I'm going to assume that was a joke rather than an actual assessment of my value, because insulting your host's fiancé at his own dinner table would be remarkably poor strategy. But just to clarify, I'm not a pet, exotic or otherwise. I'm a human being with agency and opinions, and I chose to be here. That choice might seem incomprehensible to someone who views relationships as purely transactional, but I assure you it was made with full awareness of what this world entails. The table had gone silent. Hwang's expression cycled through surprise, anger, and then something more calculating. Tae-min, rather than looking concerned, wore a small smile that suggested satisfaction. "Ms. Vaughn is correct," he said quietly in Korean, his tone pleasant but carrying an edge that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "And I should clarify something for all of you. My choice of partner is not a business decision open to committee review. It's a personal one, and anyone who treats her with disrespect will be treated as someone who disrespects me. I hope that's clear enough to avoid future misunderstandings." The message was received. The dinner continued with strained politeness, and Serena realized she'd just navigated her first real test. Not perfectly, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut, but successfully. She'd established that she wouldn't be dismissed, wouldn't be reduced to decoration, wouldn't accept being treated as less than human even in a world that often operated by inhuman rules. Later that night, in the car driving back to the Hannock house, Tae-min was quiet. Serena could feel him thinking, processing the evening's events and their implications. "You should have ignored it," he said finally. "Hwang is petty and easily offended. By confronting him directly, you've made an enemy." "I already had an enemy," Serena countered. "Every person at that table was evaluating whether I was weak enough to exploit. Silence would have been confirmation. At least now they know that disrespecting me comes with consequences." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the passing streetlights. "You understand that consequences in our world aren't like consequences in yours? Hwang won't write a bad review or spread social media gossip. He'll look for opportunities to prove you're a liability, to demonstrate that my judgment in choosing you was flawed. Then we'll deal with it." Serena met his eyes. "You warned me this would be difficult. I said I was staying anyway. Did you think I meant I'd stay as long as it was comfortable? I'm not here to be decorative, Tae-min. I'm here to be useful. And useful sometimes means uncomfortable." His smile was slow but genuine. "My mother chose better than she knew. Or maybe," he paused, seeming to reconsider his words, "maybe the universe did. I'm not a religious man, Ms. Vaughn, but there's something almost fateful about your presence here. Like perhaps this was supposed to happen." "That's a dangerous way to think," Serena said softly. "It absolves us of responsibility for our choices. We're here because we chose to be, not because fate demanded it. That matters. Does it? Choice, fate, accident, the result is the same. You're in danger because of me." "No," Serena corrected. "I'm in danger because of a system that treats human beings as negotiating assets. That's not your fault any more than it's mine. But what we do about it, how we navigate this situation, that is our responsibility." They rode in silence for a while, and Serena found herself thinking about her father's lessons on leadership. He'd always said that the measure of a person wasn't found in easy circumstances, but in how they handled pressure, constraint, impossible choices. By that metric, she was being measured now in ways she'd never anticipated. What she was learning, though, what life was teaching her through this surreal experience, was that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the recognition that some things mattered more than safety. Standing beside someone who needed you mattered. Refusing to accept a world's cruelty as inevitable mattered. Choosing dignity over convenience mattered. These weren't revolutionary insights. People far braver than her had learned them throughout history. But knowing something intellectually and living it experientially were entirely different things. Serena was discovering the gap between theory and practice, between knowing what courage looked like and actually embodying it. The next crisis came faster than anyone anticipated. Serena was in her temporary apartment, a furnished unit in Gangnam that Mrs. Han had insisted she move into for security reasons, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was in English. "Are you enjoying your performance? Such dedication. I almost believe it myself." Her blood went cold. She was reaching for her phone to call Tae-min when it rang, his name appearing on the screen. "Don't respond to any messages," he said without preamble, his voice tight. "Someone's leaked information about our arrangement to Kang's people. I don't know how much they know, but we have to assume they've figured out the engagement started as a deception." "I just got a text," Serena said, taunting me about performance. Tae-min cursed quietly in Korean. "Where are you?" "My apartment." "Should I?" "Stay there. Lock everything. I'm sending security now. Don't open the door for anyone except Cheongsu, and make him identify himself through the door before you let him in." "Tae-min, what's happening?" His silence stretched long enough that she knew the answer would be bad. Kong is making a move. If he can prove the engagement was fake, he'll use it to humiliate my family publicly, to demonstrate that we're weak enough to lie about alliances. That gives him the political capital to push his agenda. Continue. 10:35 a.m. Harder. But if the engagement appears to be real, if you and I genuinely care for each other, then he has to recalibrate his approach. He paused. We need to be convincing, Serena. Starting now. Convincing how? Meet me at Latte World Tower. The observation deck. 1 hour. Dress like you're going on a date, not a business meeting. Bring nothing you're not willing to lose if we have to run. The line went dead before she could ask for clarification. 50 minutes later, Serena stood on the observation deck of one of Seoul's tallest buildings, watching the city sprawl below her in an endless grid of lights. She'd chosen a simple dress, leather jacket, comfortable shoes that could handle running if needed. She felt exposed up here, visible, but she understood the logic. A public location meant witnesses, meant security cameras, meant any violence would have consequences. Tae-min arrived with Park Ji-hun and 2 other security personnel, but he dismissed them to the far end of the deck, creating a bubble of privacy in the midst of public space. He looked tired, Serena noticed. Not just physically fatigued, but carrying the weight of decisions that had no good outcomes. They're watching us, he said quietly, moving to stand beside her at the railing. Kang's people, probably others. There are cameras everywhere, and anything we do here will be analyzed for authenticity. So this is a performance, Serena said. A public one. Yes and no. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I could stage something convincing. Hire actors to play witnesses, manufacture evidence of a relationship. But that's what they'd expect. What they won't expect is the truth. Which is that over the past 4 days, I've discovered I actually like you. That the conversations we've had, the way you think, your refusal to be diminished even in situations designed to overwhelm you, all of it has made me want to know you better. Not as a strategic asset or a temporary solution, but as a person. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I'm not asking you to love me, Serena. That would be absurd. But I am asking if there's any possibility that you could, eventually, see me as more than just an assignment you agreed to out of kindness or obligation. The question landed with unexpected weight. Serena had been so focused on navigating the immediate dangers, on learning the rules and playing her role, that she hadn't stopped to examine her own feelings. But now, forced to consider them, she realized the truth had been growing quietly beneath her awareness. She liked him, not just as an ally or a partner in this strange charade, but as a person. She liked his wry humor, his willingness to acknowledge weakness, his careful consideration of how his choices affected others. She liked the way he listened when she spoke, as if her words mattered beyond their tactical value. She liked the glimpses she'd seen of the man beneath the role. The son who protected his mother despite her manipulations, the leader who felt the weight of every life dependent on his decisions. Liking wasn't love, but it was a foundation, and in a world where most relationships were transactional, even liking felt revolutionary. Yes, she said simply. There's possibility. I can't promise you where it leads, but I can promise I'm willing to find out. His relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as tension released. Then let's give them something real to see. He took her hand, and they stood together at the railing, looking out over the city. To any observer, they were just another couple sharing a romantic moment at one of Seoul's most iconic locations. But Serena knew that somewhere in the darkness below, people were watching, analyzing, trying to determine if this connection was genuine or merely another layer of deception. Let them watch, she thought. Let them try to quantify something as unmeasurable as 2 people choosing to be honest in a world built on lies. The real lesson she was learning, the one that would stay with her long after this situation resolved, was about the courage required for vulnerability. It was easy to be strong when strength meant building walls, maintaining distance, protecting yourself from potential harm. It was infinitely harder to be strong enough to let someone in, to admit that you didn't have all the answers, to acknowledge that connection mattered more than control. Her father had taught her about tactical courage, the kind needed to face physical danger. Her mother had taught her about moral courage, the kind needed to stand for principles when it cost you something. But this was emotional courage, the willingness to risk being hurt because the alternative was never being truly known. As they stood together under Seoul's sky, Serena Vaughn realized she was learning the hardest lesson of all, that the greatest risk wasn't physical danger or professional failure. It was the risk of caring for someone in a world determined to use that caring as a weapon. And the greatest courage wasn't facing that risk without fear. It was facing it despite the fear, choosing connection over safety, choosing to be human in circumstances designed to make you something less. The attack started small. A shipment of legitimate medical supplies diverted mid-transit. A restaurant under Han protection vandalized, the owners intimidated by men claiming allegiance to Chairman Kong. Financial accounts frozen due to irregularities reported by anonymous sources who somehow had access to information that should have been secure. Kong was testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses, demonstrating that he could strike at will without committing to full warfare. It was psychological strategy wrapped in plausible deniability. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger retaliation, but collectively damaging enough to create the impression of a family losing its grip on power. Serena found herself drawn into strategy sessions that resembled her work consulting sessions in all the worst ways. They met in the basement of the Hannock house, a modernized war room incongruous beneath the traditional architecture above, and she listened as Tae-min's lieutenants debated responses. "We hit back," Park Ji-hun argued. "Target their smuggling operations in Incheon. Make it clear there are consequences." "That escalates into open war," Lee Min-ji countered. "Which is exactly what Kong wants. He's positioned to weather conflict better than we are right now. Our financial reserves are stretched, and we have pending negotiations with the Japanese syndicates that require us to appear stable. So we do nothing?" Park's frustration was evident. "Let them chip away at our territory piece by piece? We do something smarter than matching violence with violence," Tae-min said quietly. He'd been listening without speaking, his focus on the information displays Lee had prepared. "Min-ji, show me again the pattern of attacks. Not the individual incidents, but the pattern." Lee pulled up a map of Seoul with red marks indicating each attack site. Viewed collectively, they formed a rough semicircle around the Han family's core territory. Not random targets, but a systematic encroachment designed to isolate them geographically. Serena studied the pattern with the same analytical focus she'd bring to a supply chain analysis. "He's not just testing your defenses," she said slowly. "He's positioning for a siege. If he can cut off your access to these neighborhoods, he controls your revenue streams and your recruitment base. You become an island surrounded by hostile territory." The room went silent. Tae-min looked at her with something like revelation. "And islands can be starved out without firing a shot." "Exactly. This isn't about provoking you into a fight. It's about making the fight unnecessary by eroding your position until you have no choice but to negotiate from weakness." She moved closer to the display. "Which means the traditional response, retaliation, plays into his strategy. He wants you angry, wants you to look aggressive, wants your allies to see you as the destabilizing force. So what do? Park asked, his skepticism evident. "Politely ask him to stop?" "No," Serena said. "We identify why he's confident this strategy will work and remove that confidence. He's moving this aggressively because he believes he has something we don't, information, inside access, something that makes him think we can't effectively counter him." Lee Min-ji was already nodding, her fingers flying across her tablet. "A mole. You're suggesting we have a mole in our organization." "I'm suggesting that the probability of coordinated attacks this precise without internal intelligence is statistically improbable." Serena felt herself sliding into consultant mode, emotions set aside in favor of cold analysis. Someone is feeding him real-time information about your operations, your schedules, your vulnerabilities. The implications settled over the room like fog. If there was a traitor in their organization, then every conversation, every strategy session, every plan was potentially compromised. Paranoia was the natural response, but paranoia would tear them apart as effectively as any external attack. Tae-min, though, looked almost relieved. "It's actionable. We can't fight an omniscient enemy, but we can hunt a traitor." He turned to Lee. "Min-ji, I want a full audit of anyone who had access to the information that would have enabled these attacks. Cross-reference with financial irregularities, unexplained absences, pattern breaks in behavior." "That's a lot of people," Lee warned. "And if word gets out that we're investigating our own ranks, then we do it quietly. Start with the people closest to operational planning." Tae-min's expression was grim. "I hate this. Suspecting people I trust, people who've served my family for years. But Serena's right. The alternative is letting an invisible enemy pick us apart." Serena found herself uncomfortable with the gratitude in his voice. She'd just suggested tearing apart his organization's trust structure, hunting for traitors among people he considered family. That wasn't something to be praised. It was a necessary violation, the kind of ugly choice that left scars even when it was correct. Perhaps that was another lesson she was learning. That wisdom sometimes meant accepting there were no good options, only different flavors of bad ones. The art wasn't finding perfect solutions. It was choosing which imperfections you could live with. The investigation took 3 days of meticulous work. Lee Min-ji proved to have a detective's mindset, building timelines and correlations with the same precision Serena would apply to financial forensics. They worked together in the war room, two women from wildly different backgrounds united by analytical thinking and shared investment in preventing more violence. Here, Lee said on the third night, pointing to a pattern in her data. Hwang's operations manager, Jin Seo-jun. He's been making unexplained trips to Incheon, meeting with people we can't identify. His spending patterns show cash infusions that don't match his legitimate salary. And he had access to the shipment schedules, the security rotation, the financial account information. Serena felt her stomach drop. Jean was at the dinner where Hwang insulted me. He's Hwang's man. Was Hwang's man, Lee corrected. But he's been on our payroll for 8 months, supposedly as part of a reconciliation gesture after a territorial dispute. I think we've been paying someone to spy on us. Tae-min, when they presented the evidence, looked like he'd aged a decade. Betrayal is worse than enmity. At least an enemy is honest about wanting to destroy you. He studied the documents, the undeniable pattern of deception. We bring him in. No, Serena heard herself say. Both Lee and Tae-min turned to her in surprise. If you bring him in, you tip off whoever he's reporting to that you've discovered the leak. Better to feed him false information. Use him to mislead Kong about your actual plans. Counterintelligence, Lee said, approval in her voice. Make him an asset instead of just neutralizing a threat. Tae-min considered it, then nodded slowly. We'd need to be careful. Plan information that's believable but not too valuable. Create false vulnerabilities while reinforcing real ones. He met Serena's eyes. You're suggesting we fight deception with deception. I'm suggesting you fight strategy with strategy. Kong thinks he has an advantage. Use that confidence against him. They spent the next week building an elaborate fiction. False shipment schedules, fake financial concerns, manufactured internal conflicts. All of it carefully constructed to paint a picture of an organization teetering on the edge of collapse. Jean dutifully reported everything, never realizing he was carrying carefully crafted lies back to his real masters. And while Kang's people focused on the weaknesses they'd been shown, Tae-min's organization quietly shored up their actual vulnerabilities, reinforced their real positions, and prepared for the confrontation they knew was coming. Serena found herself impressed by the complexity of it all. The layers of deception, the psychological maneuvering, the way information itself became a weapon. It was like watching a master class in strategic thinking, except the stakes were human lives rather than corporate market share. But the cost of that strategy became personal when Mrs. Han disappeared. Serena was reviewing financials with Lee when Cheongsu burst into the war room, his usual composure shattered. Mrs. Han didn't return from her afternoon walk. Her security detail is dead, both men execution style. We found her phone smashed at the scene. The world seemed to tilt. Serena grabbed the table edge to steady herself, watching Tae-min's face cycle through shock, grief, and then something harder, the kind of cold fury that burned without heat. Kong, he said, the name barely more than a whisper. He took my mother. We don't know that, Park Ji-hun started, but Tae-min cut him off with a gesture. Who else? Who else would be bold enough, angry enough, desperate enough to kidnap the matriarch of a major family? His hands were shaking, Serena noticed. He clenched them into fists to still the tremor. He knows we've been feeding him false information. Somehow he figured it out, and this is his response. He's forcing me to negotiate from the worst possible position. Then we get her back, Serena said, her voice steadier than she felt. We find out where he's holding her, and we get her back. It's not that simple. He'll have her somewhere secure, surrounded by his people. Any rescue attempt would be a bloodbath. Tae-min's voice cracked slightly. She did this to protect me, put you in my path to save my life. And now she's going to die because I couldn't protect her. Serena moved to him without thinking, putting her hand on his arm. Hey, look at me. She waited until he met her eyes. Your mother is brilliant, resourceful, and tougher than you're giving her credit for. She knew the risks of the game she was playing. She made choices, we all did. Don't dishonor those choices by giving up before we've even tried. What would you have me do? Storm Kang's headquarters? Negotiate terms that will destroy everything she was trying to preserve. No, Serena said. I'd have you use the weapons you have. Intelligence. Strategy. The element of surprise. She turned to Lee. You said you've been tracking communications patterns. Can you figure out where Kong is likely holding her? Lee was already working, her fingers flying across her tablet. He owned several properties that could work: warehouses, old factory buildings, places with limited access and good defensibility. But she paused, her expression shifting. There's a pattern I'm seeing. Increased truck traffic to a shipping facility in Pyeongtaek. It's registered to a shell company, but the ownership structure traces back to Kang's financial network. Could be coincidence, Park noted. Or it could be exactly where he'd take someone he wanted to interrogate without interference, Serena countered. Isolated, industrial area, legitimate cover for security presence. It fits. Tae-min was already moving, that cold fury transforming into focused purpose. Get me everything on that facility. Blueprints, security setup, access points. I want a tactical plan within the hour. Tae-min, Park said carefully. Even if we're right about the location, this is what Kong wants. You coming in angry, making mistakes, giving him justification for larger retaliation. I know. Tae-min's voice was steel. Which is why I'm not going in angry. I'm going in prepared. And I'm bringing everyone who has a reason to see my mother safe. He looked at Serena. Including you. Me. She was startled. I'm not trained for combat operations. I'd be a liability. No, you'd be an asset. Kong knows you're involved now. Seeing you there, seeing that I trust you enough to bring you into a high-risk situation, reinforces that this relationship is real. More than that, he paused, seemed to wrestle with how to express something complicated. You see things I miss. Patterns, connections, details that seem insignificant until they're crucial. I need that perspective. I need you. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to her since this began. Not a romantic declaration or a strategic necessity, but a simple acknowledgement that she'd become important to him in ways that transcended their original arrangement. Okay, she said. Tell me what you need me to do. The warehouse sat in an industrial park where ambition went to die, corrugated metal buildings streaked with rust, overgrown lots where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt, the pervasive smell of chemicals and salt water from the nearby port. They arrived at 3 a.m., that dead hour when even criminals were tired, when attention flagged and routines became sloppy. Tae-min had assembled a small team. Park Ji-hun, Choi Young-soo, for other men whose faces carried the hardness of people who'd seen violence and survived it. They were professionals, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that came from training and experience. Serena felt acutely aware of her own inadequacy. She knew how to read a balance sheet, not clear a building. But Lee Min-ji had given her a different role. You're our real-time analyst, she'd explained, fitting Serena with an earpiece and a body camera disguised as a button. I'll be monitoring from the van, but you're the eyes on the ground. Tell me what you see that doesn't make sense, anything that feels wrong. Your instincts have been right so far. Now, crouched behind a delivery truck 50 meters from the warehouse's main entrance, Serena focused on observation. The building had minimal external lighting, but visible security patrols. 2 men circling on a pattern that seemed almost rehearsed. Too rehearsed, maybe. The kind of security you'd show if you wanted to look protected, but not impenetrable. Something's off, she whispered into her mic. The security is too obvious. If Kong wanted to keep this location secret, he'd make it look abandoned, not defended. Could be overconfidence, Park murmured from beside her. Or it could be a trap, Tae-min said quietly. Lee, can you check thermal imaging? See how many bodies are actually inside. There was a pause as Lee processed the satellite feed they'd acquired through means Serena suspected were not remotely legal. I'm showing 15 heat signatures in the main warehouse space. 3 in what looks like an office area on the 2nd floor. 1 isolated signature in the southwest corner, ground level. That's my mother, Tae-min said with certainty. Isolated, controlled. That's where they'd hold a hostage. He turned to his team. Standard breach protocol, but I want suppressed weapons and non-lethal options when possible. We're here for extraction, not war. They moved with practiced coordination, and Serena found herself swept along in the careful choreography of the operation. Choi disabled the external cameras with quick precision. Park's team created a diversion at the east entrance. Nothing dramatic, just enough noise to draw attention and split the defensive focus. And Tae-min led the primary team through a maintenance access on the north side, moving through shadows like water finding its course. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment, creating a three-dimensional puzzle of sightlines and cover. Serena stuck close to Tae-min, her heart hammering as they navigated toward the southwest corner where Mrs. Han was supposedly being held. They encountered the first guard near a forklift station. He went down silently, unconscious before he could raise an alarm. The efficiency of it was unsettling, clinical, practiced, over in seconds. Serena had to remind herself these were people defending a woman's kidnapping, not innocent bystanders. They were 20 meters from the isolated office when Serena noticed something that made her freeze. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Lee, are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "The heat signatures. How many did you say were in the main warehouse space?" 15. "Why?" "Count them now." A pause. Then Lee's voice, tight with concern. "I'm only showing 12. Where did the others go?" "They didn't go anywhere," Serena said, realization clicking into place with horrible clarity. "They were never there. Some of those signatures must be heaters or equipment giving off thermal readings that looked like people. It's a deception. He made it look like there were more guards than there actually are." "Why would he want us to think he has more security?" Park asked. "Because," Tae-min said, his voice grim, "he doesn't need security. He needs witnesses." He keyed his radio. "Everyone stop. We're walking into theater, not a rescue operation." But it was too late. The office door opened, revealing Mrs. Han sitting calmly in a chair, unbound, unhurt, and looking more annoyed than afraid. Standing beside her was Chairman Kong, smiling with the self-satisfaction of someone whose plan had unfolded exactly as anticipated. "Han Tae-min," Kong said pleasantly. "Thank you for arriving so punctually. And you brought your American fiancée. How thoughtful." Serena felt the trap close with almost physical weight. This wasn't a hostage situation. It was stagecraft. Kong had created conditions that would force Tae-min to respond predictably, to gather his resources and attempt a rescue that would look like an aggressive action rather than a defensive one. "My mother appears unharmed," Tae-min said carefully, his weapon lowered but not holstered. "I assume you have terms." "Terms?" Kong looked genuinely amused. "This isn't a negotiation. This is an education. You've been playing games, Han. Feeding false information through your mole, thinking you were clever. But did you ever consider that I knew about your deception? That I allowed it to continue because it served my purposes?" The psychological warfare was masterful. Kong was systematically dismantling Tae-min's confidence, revealing that every move they'd thought was strategic had actually been anticipated. It was the kind of manipulation that left you questioning not just your tactics, but your fundamental ability to perceive reality accurately. "You've made your point," Tae-min said, his voice strained. "We underestimated you. Now let my mother go, and we can discuss whatever terms you actually want." "Oh, I'll release her. I was never going to harm her. That would be counterproductive." Kang's smile widened. "But first, I want something from you. A demonstration of good faith, you might say. Name it. Send your fiancé to me." The words hit like a punch. Serena felt Tae-min's entire body tense beside her, felt the immediate calculation running through his mind. The cost-benefit analysis of what Kong was actually demanding. "No," Tae-min said flatly. "Then your mother stays here. Not as a prisoner, I'm not a barbarian, but as a guest who can't seem to find her way home. These industrial areas are so dangerous at night. Accidents happen. It was an impossible choice engineered with malicious precision. Refuse, and Mrs. Han remained in danger. Agree, and Serena became Kang's hostage instead, a bargaining chip he could use indefinitely. But Serena had learned something important over these strange weeks. That impossible choices often looked different when you examined them from angles their architects hadn't anticipated. Kong had constructed this trap assuming everyone would operate within the rules he'd established. What if they didn't? "I'll go," Serena said clearly. "No," Tae-min started, but she cut him off with a look. "I'll go to Chairman Kong, and we'll have a conversation. Just the two of us. No weapons, no security, no theatrics. Because I think the chairman and I have something in common." Kang's expression flickered with interest. "And what would that be, Ms. Vaughn? We're both outsiders trying to navigate a system we didn't create. You weren't born into this world any more than I was. I've done my research. You built your organization from nothing, earned your position through intelligence and strategy rather than inheritance. That takes courage, vision, the willingness to be underestimated and then prove everyone wrong. It was a calculated risk, appealing to Kang's ego and his sense of personal history. But it was also true. She'd learned enough about him to know he was a self-made man in a world of dynasties, someone who'd fought for every scrap of respect he'd earned. You're perceptive, Kang acknowledged, and brave to walk toward me when you should be running away. Very well. Come forward, Ms. Vaughn. Let's have our conversation. Serena felt Tae-min's hand catch her wrist, not restraining but connecting. Don't do this, he said quietly. I can't lose you too. You won't, she promised, though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. Trust me. Trust that I see something you don't. She walked forward with more confidence than she felt, crossing the space between the two men who represented opposing forces in a war she'd stumbled into by accident. When she reached Kang, she didn't bow or show deference. She simply met his eyes as an equal. What is it you actually want, Chairman Kang? Because I don't believe it's territorial expansion or revenge, or even the forced marriage you originally proposed. Those are tactics. I'm asking about the goal beneath them. Kang studied her for a long moment, seeming to genuinely consider the question. I want legitimacy, he said finally. I've built an empire, but it's seen as crude, nouveau riche, lacking the pedigree of families like the Hans. I want my children to inherit something respected rather than merely feared. Then help me understand how kidnapping Mrs. Han and threatening her son advances that goal. Because from where I stand, it makes you look desperate rather than powerful. It makes your organization look unstable rather than strong. And it guarantees that whatever temporary control you gain through intimidation, you'll lose the moment a better opportunity presents itself to your subordinates. She was taking a massive risk, speaking this bluntly to a man who could have her killed with a gesture. But she'd learned something about power in these weeks, that sometimes the appearance of fear was more dangerous than actual fear. If you acted afraid, you invited escalation. If you acted like an equal, sometimes people rose or fell to meet that expectation. You're telling me my strategy is flawed, Kang said, his tone neutral. I'm telling you there might be a better path to what you actually want. One that doesn't require you to make enemies of people who could be valuable allies. And what would you know about alliances, Ms. Vaughn? You're a finance consultant playing at being a mob wife. Maybe. Or maybe I'm someone who sees this situation clearly precisely because I'm not invested in old grudges and inherited conflicts. You want respect? Earn it by being the one who breaks the cycle of violence. Propose an actual partnership with the Han family. Not a hostile takeover disguised as marriage, but a legitimate collaboration between organizations that have complementary strengths. And why would the Hans agree to partner with someone who just kidnapped the family matriarch? Because, Serena said, turning to look at Tae-min, sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to put down your weapons and pick up a conversation instead. It was a gamble built on psychology and hope in equal measure. She was betting that both men were tired of the constant vigilance, the endless maneuvering, the weight of decisions that determined whether people lived or died. She was betting that beneath the posturing and the violence, there might be a path toward something better. The silence stretched. Then Mrs. Han spoke for the first time, her voice carrying that particular authority that comes from surviving decades in a brutal world. Listen to her, she said simply. Not because she's Tae-min's fiancée or because she's particularly wise, but because she's asking the right question. What do we actually want? All of us? If it's just endless conflict and territorial disputes, then by all means, continue this farce. But if there's any part of you, any of you, that wants something more, then perhaps it's worth hearing what she has to say. Kang looked between them, his expression cycling through calculations Serena couldn't fully read. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. Not the polite society laugh from the dinner party, but something genuine, almost relieved. You're a remarkable woman, Ms. Vaughn. Foolish, perhaps, but remarkable. He turned to Tae-min. Your mother's judgment, it seems, was better than mine. Very well. Mrs. Han may leave. And I'm willing to discuss terms for a collaborative arrangement, though I make no promises about outcomes. That's all we're asking, Tae-min said carefully. A conversation without theatrics. Then let's schedule it. Properly this time, with lawyers and accountants rather than guns and kidnapping. I'm assuming Ms. Vaughn will be involved in the negotiations. Assuming she still wants to be, Tae-min said, looking at Serena with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. After all this, I wouldn't blame her for taking the first flight back to New York. But Serena knew with sudden clarity that she wasn't going anywhere. Not because she was trapped or obligated, but because something had shifted during these weeks. She'd discovered that she could navigate impossible situations, that her skills translated to contexts she'd never imagined, that she was stronger and more adaptable than she'd known. More than that, she'd discovered that she cared. About Mrs. Han's safety, about Tae-min's burden, about the possibility that even in a world built on violence, there might be room for redemption and change. "I'm staying," she said, "for as long as you'll have me." No pretense this time, just an honest commitment to figuring out what happens next. The look Tae-min gave her was worth everything, fear, danger, uncertainty and all. The negotiations took 6 weeks and resembled the most complex corporate merger Serena had ever navigated, except with significantly more potential for bloodshed if anyone felt disrespected. They met in neutral territory, a conference room in a luxury hotel that probably specialized in discretion, and worked through terms with the same meticulous attention to detail that Serena would bring to any professional engagement. The initial agreement was modest: joint oversight of disputed territories, profit-sharing arrangements that benefited both organizations, mechanisms for resolving conflicts without violence. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was something better than war. A framework that acknowledged both groups had reasons to cooperate that outweighed their reasons to fight. Chairman Kong proved surprisingly reasonable once his dignity was satisfied. The kidnapping had been his power play, his demonstration that he couldn't be dismissed or deceived. But with that point established, he seemed content to negotiate fairly. "I underestimated you," he told Serena during a break in one session. "I saw a convenience, a temporary solution to an immediate problem. I didn't see that you'd become the solution to a larger problem, that your outsider perspective would reveal paths none of us could see because we were too close to our own histories." "I'm not sure that's entirely accurate," Serena replied. "You all knew cooperation was possible. You just needed someone to say it out loud who wasn't invested in maintaining old grudges." "Perhaps. But saying it and surviving the saying are two different things. You gambled your life on the hope that we were all tired enough of fighting to try something different. That took courage." Serena had thought about that often in the weeks since the warehouse confrontation. She'd gambled with terrible odds, walking toward a man who had every reason to see her as an enemy. But she'd learned something her father had tried to teach her years ago, that sometimes the most dangerous moment is also the moment of greatest opportunity for change. Violence was easy. It was predictable, familiar, satisfying in its immediate resolution. Peace was hard. It required patience, compromise, the willingness to trust people who'd given you reasons not to trust them. But peace was also the only path that didn't inevitably lead to everyone losing eventually. The framework they built wasn't perfect. There were disputes, moments of tension, times when the old patterns of thinking reasserted themselves. But there was also unprecedented cooperation, joint operations that benefited both organizations, and slowly, incrementally, a shift in how people thought about their relationships with former enemies. Serena's role evolved during those weeks. She was no longer pretending to be Tae-min's fiancée. She was genuinely his partner, in business and increasingly in life. They spent long hours together, working through problems that had no clear solutions, learning to navigate each other's thinking styles and complementary skills. "You're good at this," he told her one evening as they reviewed profit projections from their first joint venture. "Building frameworks, seeing systems, finding the logic beneath chaos. You could have a career in our world if you wanted it." "Do I want it?" Serena asked, the question genuine. "I came here for a 3-month consulting contract. I got pulled into a criminal conspiracy by accident. Now I'm helping negotiate treaties between gangs and considering whether to make that my life. That's a hell of a career pivot." "It is," Tae-min agreed. "But I've watched you over these months. You come alive in crisis, in complexity, in situations that would overwhelm most people. You pretend you're just analyzing problems, but you're actually solving them, creating solutions that didn't exist before you arrived." His insight was uncomfortably accurate. Serena had been telling herself she was temporary, a visitor in this world who would eventually return to her normal life. But the truth was that normal life had started to feel inadequate. Not because it was less dramatic, she'd be perfectly happy never attending another underground negotiation, but because she'd discovered capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. She'd learned she could navigate danger without freezing. She could read complex social situations and identify leverage. Continue. 10:40 a.m. Points for intervention. She could build trust with people whose backgrounds and values differed wildly from her own. These weren't skills she developed in business school. They were capacities that had only emerged when circumstances demanded them. "What if I stay?" she asked quietly. "Not as your fiancé. That was always a fiction we let become something real. But as a partner in building whatever this is becoming. A consultant for hire, maybe, helping families like yours transition toward more sustainable business models. You'd be walking away from Morrison and Wright, from a career path that was taking you toward senior partnership. I'd be walking toward something that matters more. Not because this world is more important than that world, but because I've discovered I'm better suited to this kind of work. The impossible negotiations, the high-stakes problem-solving, the navigation of human complexity masquerading as business strategy." Tae-min was quiet for a moment, studying her with that intense focus that she'd learned to recognize as him processing something significant. "I love you," he said finally. "I should probably say that before we discuss business partnerships or long-term career decisions. Because whatever else is true, that's the foundation. I love you. Not because you saved my life or because you're strategically valuable, but because you're the first person I've met who sees me clearly and chooses to be here anyway." The declaration landed with unexpected gentleness, not a dramatic confession, but a simple statement of fact. And Serena realized that she'd known it already, had been living in that knowledge without naming it explicitly. "I love you too," she said, which complicates everything and simplifies it at the same time. "How so?" "Because now every decision I make about staying or leaving, about what I want my life to look like, has to account for the fact that my life is entangled with yours. That's not a burden, it's just a reality that changes the calculation." They sat together in the quiet of his office, not touching but connected, two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives through accident and found something worth choosing deliberately. The wedding happened 6 months later, not as a strategic alliance or a political statement, but as an honest celebration of two people who'd decided to build a life together despite the complicated circumstances that had brought them to that point. Mrs. Han cried through the entire ceremony, her tears equal parts joy and relief that her desperate gambit had yielded something genuine. "I didn't know," she told Serena during the reception. "When I approached you that night, I was just trying to buy my son time, to disrupt Kang's plans long enough to find a real solution. I never imagined you'd become the real solution." "I think we all became the solution," Serena replied. "You by being bold enough to take the risk, Tae-min by being willing to see possibilities outside tradition, Kang by being tired enough to try something different. I was just the catalyst. You're more than a catalyst. You're proof that change is possible, that our worlds aren't as separate as we pretend, that fresh perspectives can transform seemingly intractable problems." Mrs. Han smiled. "Also, you're making my son happier than I've seen him in years. That alone would justify every risk." Serena's parents had attended the wedding despite initial profound concerns about their daughter marrying into organized crime. Her father, after several long conversations with Tae-min about security protocols and organizational ethics, had grudgingly acknowledged that his future son-in-law took his responsibilities seriously. "I don't approve of this life," he'd told Serena privately. "But I approve of you, and I trust your judgment. You've always been able to see things clearly, to assess situations accurately. If you believe this is where you belong, then I'll support that choice." His trust meant everything. It confirmed what Serena had been discovering throughout this journey, that strength wasn't about never being afraid or uncertain, but about having the courage to make choices despite fear and uncertainty. Her father had taught her tactical thinking, but he'd also taught her to trust her instincts, to believe in her capacity to handle whatever came. The reception was an unlikely mixture of Serena's American colleagues, bemused by the heavily secured venue and carefully vetted guest list, and representatives from Seoul's underworld, who were slowly learning to see her as more than just Han Tae-min's unusual choice of partner. Chairman Kang attended with his daughter, who had proven surprisingly valuable in the new collaborative framework, her analytical skills and political instincts making her a key figure in managing shared interests. As Serena danced with her new husband, surrounded by people whose lives had been irrevocably changed by one woman's desperate whisper at a New Year's gala, she reflected on everything she'd learned. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She'd learned that the most meaningful changes often came from unlikely sources. Outsiders who saw possibilities that insiders had trained themselves not to notice. She'd learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections complemented your own, whose presence made you want to become better without demanding you become different. Most importantly, she'd learned that redemption was possible even in the darkest contexts, that systems built on violence could evolve towards something better, that human beings had the capacity to choose differently than their circumstances suggested. "What are you thinking about?" Tae-min asked, his voice low near her ear. "About how strange life is," Serena replied. 6 months ago, I was a consultant worried about quarterly projections and partnership track timelines. Now I'm negotiating peace treaties between criminal organizations and married to someone I met through an elaborate deception. Regrets? Not even one. She smiled. Maybe that should worry me, that I've adapted this quickly to a world I never intended to join. But it doesn't, because I finally feel like I'm doing work that matters, with people I care about, in ways that might actually make a difference. That's all any of us can hope for, Tae-min said. That our choices matter, that our presence changes things for the better, that we leave the world slightly improved for having been in it. As midnight approached, Serena found herself thinking about Mrs. Han's whispered request that had started everything. "Pretend you're my son's fiancée." It had been a desperate plea, a mother's gambit to protect her child. But it had also been an invitation, an accidental doorway into a life Serena never would have chosen deliberately, but that had chosen her in return. The fireworks began, painting the Seoul sky in brilliant colors, each burst of light a temporary defiance against darkness. And Serena Vaughn, formerly a consultant, now a negotiator, wife, and bridge between worlds, stood with her husband and watched the display, grateful for desperate mothers, unexpected invitations, and the courage required to say yes to impossible things. Because that ultimately was what she'd learned. That the greatest adventures began not with careful planning, but with the willingness to step forward when life offered you a path you'd never anticipated. That wisdom wasn't about having all the answers, but about being brave enough to live the questions. That love wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances, but about choosing to show up, day after day, for the messy, complicated, beautiful work of building a life with someone else. The story that had begun with a lie had become the truest thing in her life. And if that wasn't a testament to the unpredictable grace of existence, she didn't know what was.